My name is Aku Kadogo, and I'm here and delighted to be here with the South African Film Festival today with our honored guest, Richard Wicksteed. Greetings, Richard. How are you?
Greetings, Aku. I'm good. I'm in an early Kalahari morning in the Northern Cape of South Africa. It's pretty chilly, but as you know, it's really beautiful out here in the desert, and we're on production at the moment. So yeah, it's kind of my happy place, and it's good to be here.
Good. Are you
And
working on another film?
Yes, actually, we're doing a documentary on a short documentary on the impact of COVID on the San or Bushman people of the Northern Cape in South Africa, adjacent to the Kalahari Transfrontier Park.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
Let's begin. Would you share with us how you began your relationship with the San people?
It actually goes back to my childhood in Cape Town. There's a rock shelter in a place called Fishhoek in a small mountain, which has the only rock art in Cape Town that still survives. And as a child, I used to walk there with my dogs and look at this art on the wall and really wonder about it. And I had a history teacher at school who told us that this is from the first people, from the ancestors of humanity. And he was a really good teacher. And this whole experience sparked my long-term, lifelong interest in the first people of Africa. So since childhood, I went on a long political odyssey through the South African anti-apartheid movement, exile in Zimbabwe, where there was a huge amount of San rock art. And I spent a lot of time looking at the rock art and then eventually starting to meet San communities in Western Zimbabwe and then later Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa, and started to work with various communities.
And so did you always start out, were you always a filmmaker? How did that relationship? So how did you get into film and then documenting your encounters and your relationship with the San people?
I started off actually as a journalist, a student journalist first, and then a newspaper journalist, reporter in South Africa during the apartheid years. And eventually one thing led to another, and various encounters with the South African security services. And I went into exile in Zimbabwe, and I really had always had a long-term interest in filmmaking. And I went to London and I did a short video course. That was in 1985. And I came back to Zimbabwe in 85 and I started making documentaries. First political kind of anti-apartheid documentaries, looking at the struggle in Southern Africa, and then starting to work in deep African cultural tradition. Firstly, through a film that I made with an mbira player, which is the finger piano that calls the ancestral spirits of the Shona people. And that led me very deep into African spiritual culture in the Southern African wilderness, let's say.
So you had a calling, really, didn't you? I mean, it sounds as though once you got involved in the cultural aspects, it began to call you as well.
Yes, I think so. It's been a lifelong calling in that sense, definitely. And my heart is really pulled towards the spiritual essence of the first people who are in Africa, or the San people, who in a sense are the ancestors of all humanity. So it gives me a deep sense of connection with the people and the deep time landscape of Africa.
And so in making your films, how do you feel that you're sharing with us, with your audience? How do you let us into this calling? have you always been attracted to dance? And let me back up a little bit. How many films have you made with the San people?
Well,
let's start
yes. Well, probably substantial films, apart from shortish, videos that look at certain specific things, but longer documentaries. I've probably made about 10 with various San communities. And most of those are, I tend to make not the pretty National Geographic type pictures of Stone Age, so, people trapped in timeless primal culture. But I've been looking at the situation of the San in Southern Africa today, and often those films are quite hard films because they show oppression, poverty, marginalization, people living on the extreme edges of society, always the lowest of the low, culturally speaking and politically speaking. and communities that have really struggled over generations through loss of land, through colonial occupation, wars of genocide and dispossession, and in the modern age, continuing marginalization as people on the fringes of society who looked down on by most other groups that are powerful in Southern Africa. But there's a soft, beautiful strength, enduring strength that comes through in sound culture. And I think it's probably has to be one of the strongest cultures on earth, even though it's so soft, in that it survived since the dawn of human time and is still with us today. And of course, during all that, I wasn't only looking at the hardship, but I was inspired always by the music and dance, because at the heart of sound culture is music and dance. And at the very heart of that dance is the healing dance, which is probably, in my opinion, the oldest shamanic ritual on earth. And it's an incredible thing to be in a healing dance and to feel so connected to this timeless zone where the spirit world and the real world there's no separation. Everything is interlinked. And when the shamans go into trance and start healing people, it's probably one of the most profoundly moving experiences that one can have. And I've been privileged to be allowed into that. I think partly because my films are also a platform. I try to make them a platform for the sound voice to go out directly. And I've built up relationships with communities over many years now. So I have ongoing relationships. And when I go back into a community, I don't need to reestablish this trust and this friendship. And after all these hard films, I thought I'd love to make a film that just celebrates sound culture. And what better way to celebrate culture than through dance, which is at the essence of.
Yes. And this is exactly what I took away from it, because yes, there is that hardship, but really, quite frankly, we're all living under a particular hardship of modern life in today's world. And so for myself, what I took away from your film was this deep yearning of the heart to go inward and express, and that it's not a pretend emotion. You know, I think that with the world of selfies and things like that, we live in a pretend, but it goes right to the spirit. And I felt enlivened by watching the film. And as you say, being allowed to come into a space that is sacred and touching so much the spirit. And I feel that you've been very fortunate to be able to see that and to document it so that we're able to experience that.
Yes, thank you. You know, and it's quite a time in sound history, because the culture is under threat, always has been, you know, since the colonial era started. And the elders now, I work a lot in my films with the elders who still carry the traditional knowledge and practice of dance and culture. And a lot of the elders are worried that the youth aren't carrying things forward, and they're very concerned. So part of the reason for making this film is also primarily actually for sound audiences, and to record for the children and the descendants of the elders. And the elders want this recorded and documented, and they want to inspire the youth. And so when I'm working with a group in a village, it adds a lot of value in the eyes of the youth to what their elders are doing. And in a sense, filmmaking helps draw in the next generation into the traditional culture. So the filmmaking that I do operates on a number of levels. You know, they take the story out to the world, but they also help regenerate the energy that's within the culture.
That is what I'm really interested in, is the regeneration, because I was left from the film with the power of regeneration, and that it's possible because film is the medium that we're taking in moving images, all of us, hundreds of images a day. So if the youth are seeing their own culture coming back to them, that surely you must be touching some of the young who,
Yes.
may I ask, are they coming to you? Are you getting some of the younger SAN people coming to you and questioning how they might contribute?
Yes. On one level, SAN youngsters also want to learn filmmaking, and I've been involved in various initiatives, training initiatives, and seeding opportunities for SAN youth to get involved in media and to document their own oral histories within their own communities, for example, and to record the elders and the knowledge of the elders. So there are a number of issues. And for example, in this film that we're shooting at the moment, we have 3 SAN people on our crew, 3 SAN young people. So we're also trying to make the films a platform for SAN skills development in modern media. Because, of course, a lot of the youngsters have cell phones, and they're already involved in this world, even though they live in very remote areas. Even if there's only a faint signal, that people still have their cell phones. Yeah.
That's a global thing. That's global.
Yeah.
What is your process, Richard? What do you have, like a kind of set way, or is there something that you do when you go in to begin a film and begin your work? And
like, for example, the genesis of SanDance. It's a film made over quite a number of years. And I first started, I think, the first Kuru Dance Festival, which is featured in the film. It's an annual festival. I attended in about 2012, but in about 2015, I started talking with people that I'd been meeting at that festival and in various villages that across Namibia and Botswana, with which I'd been working on other projects. And we started developing the idea of doing a film about dance centered around the Kuru Dance Festival. And I was working always in collaboration with SAN organizations, in particular the SAN NGO called the Kuru Development Trust in Botswana, who then and they host the Kuru Dance Festival. And I talked with them about the film, and they expressed a desire to be involved. So they became co-producers of the film. So this film is actually a partnership with the SAN organization, the leading SAN organization in Botswana. And each dance group that you see in the film is also an equity partner in the film. So it's probably one of the only films I know of with SAN people where it's a partnership as opposed to an outside observation. So the film was generated over years. And what I had to do, and what I did do, was in the years preceding to principal photography, I visited and recorded on small cameras over 2 or 3 years, each of the villages, and built up relations and trust and energy. So what you see in SanDance is actually the result of a process of relationship building that went on for several years. Yeah.
And in this relationship building, are you purely documenting, or do you find yourself participating in ceremony
Yeah, not, I try not to, the dance, especially the healing dance, is a sacred space.
Yes.
So I never will gratuitously insert myself into this space. Sometimes I'm invited into this space and then I do join, but I never, it's not my principal mission to be in the center of that sacred space. But when I'm invited, it's a beautiful privilege. And to be in a healing dance is an extraordinary experience, because it's so much about connection to things of this world and not of this world, but part of this world nevertheless. The ancestral world, the spirit world, and deep time of Africa. And, San mythology is an exquisitely beautiful mythology. For example, the healing dances are at night around a fire under the stars. And there's this incredible star mythology in San culture. So, and there's a connection between the dance and the stars. So when I'm in an environment of a healing dance, it's a feeling of connection to the earth, to the land, to the people, and to the ancestral spirits, and to the cosmos. So it's an incredible experience. Yeah.
I've experienced a little bit of what, as an outsider, of what you're talking
Yes,
about in my own life, and
yes,
it is so I relate very much to that. And so finally, I would just like to ask, how has your own life been enriched by this experience? This, it's obviously been a long time in your life now,
yes, yeah,
and
yeah.
yeah, would you like?
Yes, I couldn't imagine my life any other way now, because it has been so enriched and now so intertwined for many years with this work that I've been doing. And for me now, the African landscape is an incredibly beautiful landscape.
Mm.
And tourists from all around the world come to view the animals and the cultures and the environments of Africa. And for me, it's just given so many layers to living in Africa, and Southern Africa in particular. So when I'm traveling through or in the Southern African landscape, I'm being part of and feeling myself within so much more than just what the eye sees, but with what is immanent in the spirit world of Africa around me. For the sun, there's significance in everything, and there's no separation between magic and nature and magic and the material world. So it's an access card to the magic of, and I'll talk about the deep time of Africa, because this is a very ancient culture, and the trance healing dance is probably the oldest spiritual healing dance on earth. So it gives me a sense of appreciation of the African landscape that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And so, yeah, it's part of my own personal cosmos as well.
So you're making another film, and how have you seen your own work as it's gone out into the world? How has that impacted you and impacted the SAN even? What have you been able to bring back to them? Because
Yeah.
clearly you're getting wider and wider audiences, I would.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah. As I said, quite a few of my earlier films were activist films looking at injustices that have been perpetrated. And those films, there was one called Death of a Bushman, which was made in 2004, when in South Africa, a sand tracker, a Bushman tracker, was murdered by police, old guard South African police. And we made a film about a murder that would otherwise have been covered up and disappeared. And as a result of that film, 2 policemen were charged with murder, and South African Human Rights Commission was brought in to discuss with the San community how relationships could be improved between the government and the San people. So films can have an impact and do have an impact, and it's good to know that. Sometimes one has to be fearless, because
Yes.
or try to be fearless, or because you're dealing with powerful forces. In Botswana, for example, it's been very difficult for the San. Hunting has been banned, traditional hunting. So San can't live anymore by nomadic hunting and gathering. And the last San communities that were still living by hunting and gathering in the Central Kalahari Game Reserve in Botswana were evicted by the government in 1999, between 99 and 2004. And I made a documentary about that. And that was a very painful documentary. But the San who were being evicted wanted their voice to be heard by government and by the world. That film, the San eventually took the government to court, to the highest court in the land, and they won their court case and their rights to live, hunt, and gather in the reserve. And I covered that whole process. But in the end, the government just ignored its own high court's ruling and carried on with evictions anyway. So, these are difficult things, and they are ongoing. I think things have improved in Botswana somewhat since then. In Namibia, I think it's probably some of the San communities in Namibia, in particular in Nyanya Conservancy in northeast Namibia, have a huge conservancy, an area where they have the title deeds and they can still traditional hunt and gather. And that's where the culture remains the strongest. So as traditional culture is outlawed, there's quickly a loss of knowledge between one generation and the next. because every generation should be able to practice the skills of the previous generation. So in South Africa, San descendants are very disconnected from a lot of the deep parts of their culture, and they yearn to reestablish those deep connections. For example, the healing dance, the trance healing dance has more or less been lost in South Africa. But this community here in Northern South Africa is trying to reconnect with the dance groups in Botswana and Namibia, who are still doing the healing dance. And they want to bring the healing dance back to South Africa. And there's a small group here where I'm working at the moment that is trying to do that and to regenerate in the next generation the trance healing dance.
That's very exciting. Is there anything finally that you would like to say to us and to?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, I think for me it's very appropriate that I'm so grateful to the South African Film Festival in Australia and New Zealand for this platform, because I obviously understand and realize that there's First Peoples deep culture in Australia and New Zealand. And I've also been fascinated over the years by some of the films I've been seeing coming out of Australia with Aboriginal communities and films made by Aboriginal filmmakers. And that's very inspiring here when we're trying to work with San youngsters to inspire them to start documenting their own dramas and documentaries. And so this connection with the, Australia First Peoples and South African First Peoples through the medium of this film festival and other connections, of which there are many, because there's now a global movement of First Peoples. That's correct. And that's a wonderful thing to see. And a number of my friends and colleagues, and even my wife, is involved in that movement. And it's really exciting to see that this international movement of First Peoples is gaining strength every year at the United Nations, in international fora, at the African Union. So I think also I hope my films are part of that process and that it long may continue. But I do thank the South African Film Festival in Australia and New Zealand for this opportunity to have the San dance culture being shown in Australia. And of course, I know there are a number of South African expats in Australia and New Zealand who will love to see this film as well. So I'm grateful to connect with that audience too.
Well, on behalf of the South African Film Festival, I would like to thank you, Richard Wicksteed, for being with us today. And it's been an honor. And I look forward to seeing more of your work and seeing it come out and to sharing it with others.
Thank you so much, Aku. It's been an honor to be talking with you in this forum. And I'm so glad to have met you, and good luck with your work going forward, because I think we're on similar parallel paths.